performances, but other formats, performative and discursive, all that with the need and with urge to contextualize our work, our concerns, and to support each other, to collaborate and to meet and to share our ideas and our way of working and supporting and collaborating in the field of contemporary life, art, dance, and all this edgy and reaching and working in on the edge of medias. When I say we, here's Sonia and Sylvia, Sylvia and Anna Kreitmeier, and we are now the team that are working on this. So when this condition changed due to this current crisis, as we are now living it, we were thinking and we felt the need and the urge to carry on and with our work and with our collaboration and sharing and ideas. So we shifted the project online, and here we are now. So what happened last week, who was here and somebody who was not here, the performance that was actually supposed to happen on stage, Kit Melone worked and find a way to react to these conditions and to this reality, and performed it live. So we wanted to carry on this discussion about where our bodies, how do we react to isolation, how do we embody, how do we deal with all this as performers, as artists, as humans, and so this is where are we now with this. We invited 3, 4, 5, 6 guests from very different generation and stages of different approaches to work and performativity and places in their careers. And maybe it's now time that I stop talking and ask our guests to introduce themselves. Maybe Ivana Bago.
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you so much for inviting me. It's really a pleasure to be here. My name is Ivana Bago. I'm an art historian, curator, and currently lecturer at the University of Applied Arts in Vienna. Also, I used to work as a curator for a number of years at the Zagreb independent scene. I recently did a PhD in the US, came back, so now I'm doing more like scholarly and research-based work.
Siegmar Zacharias.
Yes, hello. Thank you for the invitation. Sorry, I didn't realize we're going to do this one by one now. But I'm a performer and a theoretician and performance artist. I write and I do kind of curatorial projects that are based on more creating situations of invitation than selection of works. I think that's it, and I'm going to say more later.
Nikolina Pristaš is here with us.
Hello everyone, I'm Nikolina Pristaš. I'm a dancer and a choreographer working within a collective BADco for almost 20 years now. And I'm a teacher at the Academy of Dramatic Arts. Yeah, I think that's almost everything that I want to say about myself so far.
And we have our students of, of the department, that is Margareta, Ella, where is, I lost you. Can you just say hi and show yourselves? Anika, and where is Linda? Ah, great. So this is these are our guests that we want to put in the same space to share their realities with us. Now, and Sonia and Sylvia, please join in the moderation if you need the time. So maybe even you were here last Saturday, and you were watching Pataphysica, Verona Pataphysica, and the discussion. So maybe you want to open and share your thoughts about it.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you know, like I feel a little bit, speaking of like viruses, I feel a little bit like an intruder in terms of the, you know, I don't come from the performing arts, right? So also, you know, the way that I'm going to talk about the performance, I think, you know, maybe does some aggression to it in the sense that I'm going to be putting it in the context of art history, but this is really more sharing of a kind of a story of you know, the past few weeks for me, and you know how the performance also intruded in my life, you know, and what I thought of it. So, you know, and these are really just some immediate thoughts to share. And I have to say that I actually only saw the performance, or rather part of it, because I, you know, switched on late. And also I didn't, I couldn't participate at the discussion later. So, you know, it's really, whatever I say, I mean, it's really like a blind date because I don't know anything about it except, you know, what was written in the invitation. I didn't even know that it was supposed to be staged live. You know, I really thought that it was kind of an ad hoc, you know, reaction to the circumstances, and that it was actually staged for Zoom, right? So, you know, there's a lot of, in a way, misreading, you know, but that will maybe be productive, right? So, basically, you know, like the watching of this ANTISEZONA piece, you know, came in the midst of my own anti-seasonal sort of performance of trying to be an art history lecturer, where, you know, suddenly everything is switching to, you know, Zoom, and, you know, handling that, adapting to these new conditions, while also switching to like 24-hour childcare, right, and 24-hour exposure of like the research of a nuclear family, you know, constantly being at home, and at the same time, you know, trying to continue working as if everything is normal, right? So, and, you know, all that with the backdrop of constantly, you know, watching the news, you know, and the daily body count of, you know, how many. By the way, do you hear me well? Because my husband is making dinner in the background.
I hear you perfectly.
Okay, great. So all of that, you know, with the backdrop of, you know, like this daily body count of, you know, how many newly infected bodies, right? How many also in Zagreb, people who are losing their homes, right, due to the earthquake, and how many people losing their jobs, which seems to be an even more dramatic statistics nowadays. So, you know, I felt so that, and together with all these like proliferation of all these theories of the causes and the effects of the COVID crisis, you know, and these range from, you know, the conspiracy theories that this is all a staging of the oncoming global totalitarianism, right? The Hunger Games Society, to, you know, New Age theories that embrace the virus because it's like the sign of the coming of the age of the new consciousness, to, you know, leftists, much more ambivalent, of course, thinking about this, where you see the virus as something that is a catastrophe that is again going to basically hurt mostly the people who are anyway the most socially vulnerable, right? But at the same time, embracing it as something that potentially brings on the sort of crisis that can be used to think of alternative models of living and working, etc. So kind of in the midst of all of this, I was rather thinking how I desire true kind of social isolation, because I felt like I didn't have it at all. It seemed like, like my social kind of engagement, which is anyway for a long time happening mostly via social media and via my computer screen, right? It just seemed to intensify. And also, while it seemed in the beginning, maybe someone can mute themselves because I hear the echo of myself coming from someone's computer. Okay, thank you. So, and I also felt like, Ivana, I think that's maybe you. Okay, yeah. And so I also felt, like that, in a way, rather than kind of stopping production, there was also this desire to continue producing, right, in the cultural sphere, immediately, like all these invitations to view exhibitions online, all these, open, suddenly things that were journals that were behind the paywalls, were opening, so it just seemed like there was so much suddenly, like all this urgency, to respond, and think about the crisis, and to at the same time continue living and to continue reproducing the life that was already going on, right? So I'm saying all this to just kind of place in the context the forwarded invitation that I got, to see the Melone Patafisica performance, where when I read it, I was kind of really like, oh no, another thing is happening, and especially after trying to watch an online recording of a theater performance, which I thought was just a horrible way to watch theater. I was very sort of suspicious about it. It's like, okay, yet another thing, right? But when I started watching it, it really captivated me. And I really, it was really one of those moments where just even without analyzing the piece, it's like, it seemed like one of those moments where art really shows how it has the power to unveil some kind of truth or the real or whatever you want to call it, much better, right, and much more effectively than all this discursive analytical production that has been going on, and all these like people engaged in trying to figure out what's going on, right? And so as I was at the same time preparing these art history online classes that were about the relation between form, like and what Frederick Jameson would call the political unconscious of the form, and one of them was like this kind of trajectory of abstract art and this trope of art history, which is the grid. Actually, this performance, without knowing much about it, somehow became part of my class that I taught to students, and part of the thinking of that art historical trajectory of the grid. Okay, so this is where I wanted to show the PowerPoint, very quickly go through it. And as I said, it's really like a blind date, and I really want to hear also more from you and from the performance and the authors, what they think about this, right? Because and so just very quickly, like a crash course in these art history themes, right? So this is like one way of seeing modernism in the visual arts is to look at how the representations of nature increasingly become rationalized and structured in these increasingly abstract forms that in the end end up in this form and trope of the grid, as Rosalind Krauss most notably wrote about it. So here you can see this progression from, let's say, Paul Cézanne to Pablo Picasso to Mondrian, which then of course turns into you know, this abstract art par excellence, and Mondrian's reduction of the of representation into the relationship between the horizontals and the verticals. Basically what I was discussing with students in class, and the kind of literature that I was referring to, was also how after the Second World War, when of course there were many theories interpreting not only modernism but modernity as inherently, also related in this dark side of modernity, right? So this belief that modernity and modernism, with this belief in science and technology and progress, right? The kind of the Holocaust then being the dark side of that, the kind of the Adorno and Horkheimer analysis of the dialectic of the Enlightenment. So, we were kind of, researching in class how then some artists, after the Second World War, started, interfering in this modernist abstract grid by inserting what the grid excluded. And what the grid excluded mostly, it's generally, right, nature and any idea of representation and mimetic resemblance to the nature and to the body. So we see here in this, what's going on? We see here in this like third image by Piero Manzoni, this like intervention where, he kind of uses this modernist abstract grid, but in place of just using it, without any body, without any tangible, matter, what the grid excluded, right? He places a bread, rolls of bread that he then paints white. I'm gonna skip over this. And basically, it's really artists trying to kind of deal with this, not only like modernity and technology, right, but with the with capitalism in the sense of this rationalization of production, of the assembly line, of commodity fetishism, and the reification of reality, etc., as here in these works by Piero Manzoni, which are actually also interesting, I think, from the performance perspective, because like they in a way show how the artist's work, the actual labor of performing and doing an artwork, the actual presence of the body that was there when it performed the work, how basically it's it ends up in this reified form of a commodity where it just has value that no longer, that is detached from this actual labor and the actual body that produced the work. Works like this that are visually completely abstract, but that here, if you see the title, this work is called Arbeit macht frei. So again, some works that are trying to bring into a connection, this idea of like this perfect grid of, let's say just modernity for the sake of simplicity, and what it excludes, right? And in this case, the Holocaust, and also the material and bodily suffering that is implicit in it. So, in a way, as I was thinking about these works, and these are now the works of the Palestinian artist Mona Hatoum, who, as you can see on the right, she's basically using again this modernist grid, but these are soaps, olive soaps produced by the Palestinians in Jerusalem. And on the left, this is this traditional headscarf that became the symbol of Palestinian resistance. But here it's intercepted with, again, this bodily and explicitly female bodily a sign of the human hair, right? So as I was kind of thinking about preparing this class, when I was looking at the performance, not knowing, of course, now I know, but not knowing that it was supposed to be staged on stage, and I had no idea what that staging would look like. But what was really very striking, to me, after thinking so much about all these grids, was using of this Zoom, deciding to use this Zoom format, right, and the Zoom interface, which now really became the grid that we are all, that defines our lives, and that we are all faced with. I mean, not necessarily like the Zoom per se and this online existence, but right, everything that stands behind the situation that brought us, to this place where we are now. So, and then looking at these, so I basically looked at it in the same way that I tried to sketch out now very, briefly, and I'm definitely also going to banalize the performance, since I also have it only as a series of sketches in my own hand, but would love to kind of think more about it. Was really, this like presence, and it was for performance. So, like it was really like super symmetrical, kind of like these perfect abstract art compositions. So, and these four, performing bodies that really seem to kind of, to me, stand in the continuity of all these art projects that are some of which I've talked about now, where like you have this insertion of human agency, and also of the agency of the bodies and of the matter that is trying to kind of negotiate and resist these grid-like structures that are imposed on life, right? So, and it seemed also from the description, there was also this insistence on this possibility of the possibility of acting, despite, this grid that is now imposed on us, and that is just represented or epitomized by the Zoom interface, right? Despite the fact that everything at this moment prevents us from, figuring out how to act in any sort of meaningful way. So, and then I was really thinking how this piece, at least for me, spoke much more than, or made me think much more than anything else I've read. And I've been very kind of, very much engaged in trying to read, and figure out what people are talking now and how they're approaching, like what's going on, in the sense of, really, making us think, what is this, what is this Zoom interface, what is this grid, that we are facing now, So I really saw this piece, and now the series of conversations that you are doing, and with this question of, what is the place of the body, and what does it mean to be embodied, in this very moment, when also what we are trying to preserve is precisely this, primarily, this bare life, this subsistence and the continuity of the kind of living body, right? It seemed that this performance was really like an invitation on this collective note-taking, as the Pirate Care Network would say, and thinking, like how to, engage in care and care of each other at these times, but also, how to think of this grid and how to define, what is this grid that is currently intercepting the life as we knew it, right? And there was also, and I will end with this because I realize I've been also talking for some time now, but one way that I tried to think about it was really, again, seeing these performers kind of trying to, negotiate and fight, for a space in these contained spaces, like, and like Sylvia, like, in her kitchen, and all these like fragmentation and doubling of the bodies. It seemed to me really to kind of define this grid primarily through, like the kind of identifying this this moment as the culmination of this immunitarian regime that we've been basically living in, right? This, idea that as humans, and then also as different classes of humans, we can isolate and protect ourselves from nature, from everything that is, conquering space with technology, extracting resources, constantly kind of insisting on this boundary between the human and the non-human, and the hierarchical relation that stands there. And then, these performing, bodies in the performance seem to me to be engaged into some kind of like autoimmunity acts, right? Where, the body is isolated within these little, rectangles, but it's fighting that isolation also through like multiplication with the mirrors, you know, with the fragmentation, and you know, that kind of, you know, spoke to me as if sort of, you know, as Fred Moten would say, as this resistance towards being a single body, you know, like even if that means that the only kind of differentiation that you can do if you're socially isolated and on your own is to fragment yourself, to kind of work against yourself in order to stage this this like performance of you know, like the resistance towards this immunitarian regime of setting boundaries and isolating one subject from another. I mean, of course, and I'm not arguing here that this is now for some kind of ecologically fascist discourse of, you know, like, you know, let the virus, you know, conquer us all, right? No, not at all, but, you know, just kind of saying that really, you know, for me, this crisis and this performance made me think about, you know, the whole situation as this culmination of this immunitarian regime that primarily tries to define the human as conquerous and as distinct from everything that surrounds it. So, you know, these performing bodies at the same time separated and merging into one another and multiplying themselves with all these mirrors, you know, is like, seemed to me like a really powerful way of articulating this, these networks of codependence that now seem to be something that we all have to think about a lot, right? And okay, I will stop there.
Ivana, I think you have to, first of all, thank you very much for all of this. I don't want to steal time now. I would like the other people to hear other people, but I think your screen you have to take away yourself.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ivana. This was really elaborate. But I think now, if there are any immediate response or questions from performance, maybe I think we should open that possibility. I don't know, Silvia or Umberto. Yeah. Jason, maybe to respond. I mean, as maybe I was introducing not so clearly. This wasn't like a substitute for a stage version. There was a stage version, and this was a particularly devised performance for this. So maybe just to clarify this, if you want, or
maybe just in short. Thank you again. It was, yes, very. It was very nice to hear your whole expose around it. Because of course, when you are inside of it, it's a totally different view on the thing that you do than as from yours. What I wanted to say is, just to make it clear, this is the piece, this is work that we did last year and that we wanted to restage this year for ANTISEZONA last weekend, and because of the lockdown, we were not in, we couldn't do it. So what we were thinking is to try to find out the way how to find out what the work is without us being able to be present in the same space at the same time, and without the possibility to perform it live on stage with audience with us. And we were thinking a lot about it, what it is in essence. And we tried to, as you said, to put it in a grid that is put on us now. And I think in essence of it is that are the spaces in between us, because it's not the work about four of us, but more about the four spaces in between these four bodies, which was of course very challenging to do then via Zoom. And but also a very, very an extraordinary I'm now lacking words, sorry, I'm really, yes. I think you left me a little bit speechless with your analysis. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
Okay. But great to know that you, yeah, because it makes sense that you created it specifically for this digital platform, right? Because, yeah.
We were also rehearsing it through the digital platform. This was actually, the work was really spending time the whole week through the digital platform and to rehearse something which is the interdependence from four of us. And this is really, yeah, it's really something very, very interesting.
Okay. So we can maybe let this cloud rest. Siegmar, you are your frame, you're performer as well as a theoretician. So what is your experience now? As Sonia was talking about you spent some time recently in USA, in New Orleans. Maybe you can just open these different perspectives. So how in different cultures are people dealing with this present moment, or your whatever is in your cloud now. Maybe you can turn on your and unmute yourself. Please.
Okay, here we go. Yeah, so I've been, I make performances since about 10 years with so-called uncontrollable materials. And it started with smoke and then kind of went to slime and then kind of went to the question of how could language be an uncontrollable material. And I did or I'm still using that as a thinking practice, something which is called drooling lecture, which is basically I'm letting the vocality and the materiality of sound and sounding be as important as the meaning-making capacities of languages. So, and I use that practice of basically, I don't swallow my spit while I speak. And I try to, and I speak about things that are questions of uncontrollability, questions of intimacy, questions of well, interdependence between humans and more than humans. And so around this or through this work, I also, people react incredibly viscerally to this. So I'm really kind of going between visceral reactions and rational thinking, or trying to follow meaning making practices. And then another thing was that on the one hand, philosophically and theoretically, I've been busy with death and also the position of death and death and life being imagined as opposites, and what thoughts can actually, or what theories and which thinkers actually, in which schools of thinking actually don't see them as opposites, for example. And then through the experience of my sister dying 2 years ago, where we could meet in this understanding that they don't have to be opposites, we managed to have a situation where we were living and dying together well, or in a way that we were crossing that border together as a continuous process that was many months long, and not because she was incredibly ill for many months, but because we were preparing, or we're integrating dying into the process of living together. And then through that experience again, I started treating death and dying really also as an uncontrollable material. as much as the nervous system, and researched a lot about the polyvagus theory by Steve Porges, and the self-regulation and co-regulation capacities of the nervous system, basically. Amongst others, because since the death of my sister, I have a tremor that I also got when I gave birth. So it's a typical reaction, self-regulatory reaction of the body in huge kind of physical stress, let's say. I mean, we all know it, for example, when you see an animal under shock recovering, they shake. And that's what we all do, and that's what bodies do until they kind of find a way back into self-regulation. And so because of that, so I'm looking or I was researching a lot of different body practices, and also questions of how does vibration actually start becoming a physical co-regulation. So not just metaphorically or symbolically, but a physical co-regulation that physically connects us with each other. So that is kind of where I was at. And from that position also, I am writing a PhD in England on intimacy and alienation, learning from uncontrollable materials, which is basically trying to formulate a poetics, so an ethical account of how can we think ethically, not in a kind of prescriptive way, but in a generative way, and that's why it's a poethics, like it's a poetics as ethics. And so with all of this luggage and baggage, I decided to go to New Orleans because I was invited there 2 years ago, actually, just before my sister died, interestingly, to present my work. And I went there and was incredibly fascinated and fell in love with how the collective of, or how I experienced anyway, the city and its people and its different communities, to have developed a huge repertoire of practices of dealing with death and dying, grieving, and celebrating life. So most people know only Mardi Gras as a big kind of parade, but there's tons of parades that always involve costuming and makeup. So there's a huge kind of rejoicing in making each other, like dressing up for each other, really. And it's for each other's stories, it's for each other's pleasure. So that's one thing. There's tons of different practices about that. Then the question is like, okay, so what types of death and dying are they grieving constantly? Well, so geologically and geographically, New Orleans is made by the sediments of the River Mississippi, which is basically meandering and has been meandering over hundreds of years. And when you see there are military cartographies of this river that are scanning the scars, they're called meandering scars. So the imprints of where the river has been are represented in different layers, so to speak. And there's one very beautiful one that has been done analog, like in an analog way, I think in the 50s, 60s, which was really like painted in with pastel colors. Now you can do that with kind of satellite, with satellite measurements, let's say, and then in 3D printing. So the sedimentation of the land is basically the sedimentation of the river. Now the river, as much as it travels, always also took land away. Settler colonialism started wanting to grab and capture this land, which led to a whole development of stabilizing levees. I mean, there are natural levees. Levees are these things like the benches of rivers that kind of, where the land gets squeezed upwards so that it becomes like a big bathtub for the river so it doesn't flood. And when these things become stabilized, or when the river gets straightened and then there are artificial levees, that's where the land all of a sudden doesn't relate to the water anymore, because the water gets a much heavier force than the land can take. So there's that. Then there is geographically, there is also a huge New Orleans and the Gulf of Mexico is one of the biggest oil extraction territories. And because of that, for example, this land has been, that's why the river has been rectified. That's why the drinking water is no drinking water in New Orleans. That's why the toxicity in that area is huge and immense and has led to something that is called the cancer corridor. That's why now, with regards to the virus, for example, the precarity is completely different than in other regions, because people are like a vast majority of people are already health-wise precarious because of the conditions. It's not an exception. It's not an exception of being exposed to toxicity. I mean, that area has been exposed to toxicity since ages and for centuries. So that's geographically. Historically, there is the history of colonialism, of many colonialist pasts. So it starts with the French, goes over to the Spanish, goes over to the English, goes back to the French, and goes back to the Americans. In the region, there was Native Americans and different tribes. Now there's also so-called Mardi Gras Indians, and Mardi Gras Indians are basically a different kind of ethnicity that started appearing when Native Indians started helping slaves to flee. And the fleeing, the helping of the support meant basically huge fights and slaughters. And they were fleeing into the swamps. So Mardi Gras Indians are black-skinned people mostly, but they're coming from mixed marriages, basically, or mixed partnerships between natives and slaves. And so there is and then of course there is the general neglect of the federal government of the region, because it is mostly black. So there's no infrastructure. I mean, the infrastructure in New Orleans, meaning the streets, but also the health infrastructure, the support or lack of support that was given after Katrina, is something that we've all heard about, but it's something that has left like a huge scar, and not just one, but it's basically re-scarred again and again and again and again and again. So those are those, and of course many others, but those are like geographically, politically, socially, and historically, the scars and traumatizations of the region and of everybody, actually, and on everybody's body. And one of the things that I encountered 2 years ago, when I was there actually only for 10 days, was the so-called second line, which is something that is called, it comes from a funeral march, and it's a funeral march which is a jazz funeral. So there's a jazz band, and there is a procession, and the first line would be, you know, the coffin, the family, and the marching band, and the second line is the public that walks afterwards. Now, the second line celebrations or parades are basically funerals without a body. So the format of the jazz funeral is taken, is kept, but it's kept as a celebration without the necessity of a body. They still do them also for funerals, or for example, when Prince died, or when Aretha Franklin died, or then they make a second line with a prostate coffin, so to speak. But it's basically, to take the funeral march as an occasion to celebrate with each other. So that's one. And the one, for example, that I encountered was, my second line was a book launch. It was a book launch of a backstreet museum that was in Tremé. Tremé is the kind of black part of town, as old as the French Quarter, which is the kind of famous part of town that everybody knows, that was built by the French colonizers. Tremé was built basically by for the black mistresses of the colonizers, as well as by the free Haitians who had come from the Haitian Revolution. So that you always had a mix of free white people, free black people, slaves, native Indians, and that relation amongst each other, who was experiencing what degree of freedom and what degree of suppression. So this backstreet museum was a kind of part of town museum that is just documenting all the kind of collective activities and people who are living there. And so that was my second line, and I was incredibly touched. And it took place at the same time on the day of Super Sunday. Super Sunday is the celebration of the Mardi Gras Indians, in celebration, commemoration, and reenactments really of when the native Indians were helping the slaves to escape. And they come out. This is a huge costuming event where there's like huge costumes out of feather and pearl, and they're big. It's almost like billboards on the front of them. They're big billboards of scenes of fights against the white, basically. So it's either a reenactment and commemoration of the fighting against the white, or it is freedom slogans for freedom of minority groups, including power to all women and things like that. I really wanted to go back and spend some time with people who are busy with these practices. And I went and got basically my idea was to spend time, partake in these events, and learn from them what these collective practices of being intimate with death and dying produce, and how they self-produce. Now, I was there about 10, 12 days before the lockdown happened. And after that, of course, nothing much more happened. I want to say that, first of all, just to say one sentence about the situation in New Orleans, because I also know that there's a lot of articles floating around about the awful situation in New Orleans. I just want to say one thing. The awful situation is really, if we want to call it that, is to account of the impossible healthcare situation. The people that I've been surrounded by, or that I met, are incredibly vigilant and careful. So this whole thing of, because it's part of the rhetoric of defamation again, to kind of, on the one hand, do a huge shaming practice against Mardi Gras, whereas at the same time there was stadiums in other states being filled with people, but nobody actually objects to that. Nobody comments about that. So interested in also what are the politics of language, that which practices of touch, for example, are being shamed and which practices are not being shamed. So huge stadium events are not being shamed, but Mardi Gras, queer gatherings, gatherings of people of color are being shamed. So that's also something to think about. Where I just want to kind of, one thing that I'm busy with also right now is also to think like what does this rhetorics of war, for example, generate? It generates enemies. And the enemy situation is always, you know, I mean, the rate of gun sales has gone up. Now, who's going to shoot the fucking virus? You can't shoot the virus, you can only shoot people. So what's happening is that there is again a kind of rethinking of, or reblaming and finding scapegoats, and that who that is, we can probably all imagine. But so that only as a kind of remark about the situation in New Orleans, in case you've read any of these articles. Because when I was there, all of a sudden on the day these articles appeared, there was one in the Guardian and one in the New York Times, I received a million emails saying like, why aren't you coming back? And that's another question. Why didn't I come back? I only came back yesterday. I stayed for about 2.5 weeks, longer than when the first kind of blocking of air traffic started happening. Also because I'm committed to finding different ways of sociality even in this time. So how can we, what are ways of touching each other and being with each other, and especially acknowledging processes of grief, even, you know, adversary grief, that have to be social and have to be collective. And the rhetoric of keeping safe individualizes it, first of all. Second of all, it, to my sensitivity, it confuses safety with exclusion. So if we think that the only sense of safety we can get is from bordering and excluding, we're repeating the same kind of territorializing politics that have been basically performed since settler colonialism. And instead of asking where does a sense of safety actually arise from? Like what are the practices that heighten a sense of safety rather than think that you can gain safety from exclusion? So that's the other thing. And one of these practices, I think, and one of the dangers is also the return to the so-called nuclear family, to kind of exclude from there. So how can we practice beyond that and outside of that? Then there are so many questions, because also then in transit, of course, over the airports, there's a whole choreography of bodies that is happening that is incredible at the moment, where people are really like taking the 2 meters distance and all of that, but then you get told to keep distance in a line, but then you get seated right next to each other, like things like this, that is quite interesting. And what else did I want to say that was important? Yeah, I think. So I think one of maybe to just sum it up there, one of the interesting things for me is to figure out what could be, how to take this not as a kind of individualizing and or re-individualizing practice, but as something that opens up and makes skins even more porous, and more receptive. Yeah, and maybe that I can end with that, because what I wanted to do in New Orleans, just as a way of giving back, because I was there in an artist residency, I was going to do one of these drooling lectures with slime, and I had I had imported 2 kilos of white powder, which is the kind of biodegradable slime that I make for like 100 liters of slime, and of course that got cancelled because it was a public event. And then I was thinking, there's some things that might be just a tiny bit too early. So yes, this situation urges me not just to rethink what is the uncontrollable and what is our relations of intimacy and alienation to it, but also what artistic practices, how can they be, first of all, how can they be translated? And it seems like the performance you did last week was a super interesting proposal, and to find out how many others can there be, like how can this liquid crystals that make up our screens that we're looking at each other at the moment, how can they become differently liquefied? Okay, so much. And I'm happy to, this is really just a giving, throwing it out there. So I'd love to really talk about these things all together later or now, but it's not really a Q&A in the sense of this is the knowledge that needs to be. There's not. It's just a state of affairs and state of emotions. Thank you.
Thank you, Siegmar. This was really beautiful and rich and opening so many really gentle and beautiful thoughts. I don't know if anyone wants to give some kind of immediate response. I think it would be important before we tackle this out. Okay. I would now like to invite Nikolina. You can join in and share what are your thoughts of intimacy and alienation, and sharing your body experience now, and how do you deal with carrying on as your embodiment and crisis as a teacher, as an artist, as a mother, as a woman?
It's not easy to start speaking after these two speakers, especially now with Siegmar and all these misery that's kind of going on in the world. For me, this whole crisis kind of brought the world to a kind of halt or a pause, and it's not pause for everyone, and it's not pause for everyone in the same sense. So I am, every day I'm very much aware that I'm speaking from a privileged position. I have a home, I have a family, I have heating, water. I have the time to think about my, my life. I have the time to think about how to change my life in the light of the events that have been going on in the last 3 weeks. When the crisis started, I was in a shock. I was really in a shock because this first moment when the quarantine started, just kind of, I started to ask myself the same questions. Okay, what's going to happen to people who have really low resources, to refugees on the borders, and then feeling completely miserable about it, the fact that you can't do physically anything about these things because you have to lock yourself down in the apartment. But then it became too much. I started to have panic attacks, and I had started to, like, not be able to sleep in the evening because it's just, the world is such a vast space, and there is so much misery in the world, and even next to us, that it just became too much. And then a couple of days after the quarantine started, we had an earthquake. That was another special experience for all those people that are living in Zagreb. It was like a joke, like something. It's like you're living in a movie. It's not real. Surreal is kind of happening, that you have a quarantine, and then you have an earthquake, and then you have people having to come out of their buildings to be like on the streets in the cold morning, really cold winter morning, and not being able to come close to each other, feeling completely insecure and not knowing actually how to behave. Women with children in pajamas, old people. I mean, it was a kind of really nature encroaching upon us, and kind of with the virus is the same thing, like just a piece of genetic information. You cannot see it, you cannot smell it circulating around the planet and making everybody be completely differently than what we are used to. So like with the it's like just this state of complete insecurity, feeling so vulnerable as a human being, like that the earth kind of reminded us that we are very small. And it's that I kind of felt on my body, that my life is in this sense so fragile, that I never thought before how fragile this life is. And that shock, like with Siegmar, you were speaking about confronting death. The moment the earthquake started, it was 10-second long earthquake, so it was not a long earthquake, but my body completely lost sense of time. I have no idea, like I have a feeling that it was like, I don't know, much longer than it was, for sure. But I have no idea if I would have to now retell what was happening in these 10 seconds and a little bit around it after it, putting clothes on my child, Sergey yelling at me to put clothes on myself, to stand there or there, taking pillows. I grabbed something that I don't know why I took it. So it was just like such a state of panic where I was completely beside myself. I don't even know where I was. And then the whole of this afternoon, like when we entered the houses and came back, this like from, let's say, from 10:30 till 3, I don't know where the time passed. It was just like it was such a corporeal experience, coming on top of this panic of coronavirus being fed through media and stuff, all this that we are kind of seeing on TV every day, that I really felt, wow, after this, nothing can be the same for me. And now that's easy to say, to kind of have this conclusion, to realize the fragility of your life, to realize that there is nothing important in life. We don't live for some reason. We just live because we live. It's like we are earthlings. We are part of this planet. We came, like we are born into it. And it's just like the meaning of life is life itself somehow. Not a project that I will do in 2 weeks, not in exam I will have to make in like 2 months, not something that I will have, like in 5 months. And this other thing, like that everything, like I realized that for years now I have been living in this modernist, all of us, in this modernist prerogative of progress, of kind of always going forward somehow, you know, like from a project to a project to a thing to something else, you know, non-stop. I know, like, for example, I knew how my life is going to be until the beginning of December. Probably most of you have the same thing. And I started to believe that that's actually my life. That, you know, like the fact that I'm going to go through a project, that's the only way I could live my life. And then I realized that all of this just kind of collapsed in 10 seconds of earthquake and this experience of being in a kind of quarantine. So for me now, I don't know what to make of it. I don't know how to, you know, like how, but I do know I need to stop and take a little bit of time to really observe what's happening to me and to people, to the world around me, to the society around me, to be able to find a way to act again. In a sense, to be a little bit like the snail, you know, not to rush so much forward, but to go somehow on the spot and slowly. There's one thing that I found interesting in thinking about the care, that, okay, all these, I wasn't so much into social media. I don't even have a Facebook account or anything like this. I'm already, for me, emails is kind of already kind of a pain in the ass type of communication, with so much communication coming at me. And I realized that, you know, like being pulled towards the screen and working on the screen nonstop completely takes me out of my body. That I'm kind of, you know, like that I'm in the screen and not in the real time and space where I actually live. And the more screen there is, the less I lose ground. The more screen I am with the screen, the more I lose ground. And now I really, before the crisis already came, I mean, before the COVID, I already kind of came to this conclusion that I need to do something about this because I couldn't control it. And now nature forced me to do it. What I found really interesting now is that one thing that I my husband, my mother, people who I love, who are important for my life. And then from there, try to kind of, you know, like you said something about this nuclear family that that needs to be kind of spread, that I agree with you. And like, it's not only the care for those who are near you, but it's just like now there are people who are near me who need help. And if I don't, like if I'm complete non-stop online, I won't be there to help. So this is something that's kind of, you know, entering my life and engaging my body on a daily level that I like very much, that I enjoy very much. It's just like the basics of life. Well, living as a human being, connecting to other human beings. This meeting now that we are online, just the fact that we are communicating and we are all over the world now brings hope. Because it's like, okay, it's just like bringing people together to talk, to exchange experiences, to know that you're not, you know, like you're not isolated, because we are actually not isolated. I mean, at the moment, physically, we're just, our movement or possibility to change space is a little bit limited. Well, largely limited, but we're not like in prisons or in like, we have these possibilities to touch each other. And now the question is, for me, you know, like Sylvia asked in the email, how do we touch our students? How do we touch our pupils? I mean, I started to ask myself very much, okay, if I don't touch with my body, since I am a very tactile person and I like to touch, how do I actually touch with words? And because I like to speak a lot, I started to ask, you know, like I say so many unnecessary words that I started to think very much about actually what I want to say to people when I'm with the students or when I'm, you know. So I don't know if I want to, maybe I don't want to make this a long expose too much of this. Maybe just to, like, for example, to mention with the students last Thursday, we had an improv session through Zoom, of course, but like we created a situation where Zrinka Šimičić and me, together with the 12 students, we created all of us created a situation where we improvised in our own rooms, and through chat we were giving instructions what to do. So we had a score basically that was made as we went along, and nobody saw the situation, nobody saw the whole, nobody saw each other dancing as we would in the studio, but we were all very much dedicated to the fact that we're going to spend these 60 minutes doing this together. And you know what I liked very much in the situation of a studio, I would be a teacher and they would be students. And here, these roles were kind of completely unimportant. Like, and you know, it gave what I liked very much about kind of exchanging through this type of, because it's a medium, or it's a platform which does offer a kind of other way of organizing social relationships, rather than when you think a classroom, what is the space of the classroom. And I think after, when we come back to the studio, we will not be anymore in the same positions. And I found that really interesting, and something that I, you know, like that I would really like to think about seriously, in terms of like how these, what has this situation now, me being, or any one of us being forced to communicate through these media, what can we learn from that situation to, yeah, what can we learn from that situation? Maybe I will stop here. Should I say something more? It is like, I would really like, because I don't know what the time is, and I'd really like to hear Ella and Linda and Maggie and Anika, what they have to say about this topic. For me, it may be just to add one thing, you know, that over the last 2 years, I've been very much busy with practicing the impossible. Like, this idea came from John Cage, and then through the work of Goat Island, somehow by sheer providence of you know, like, came to Bad Company. And in the last year and a half, we've been dealing a lot with this idea of the artist project should be practicing the impossible. So I don't want to go too much into that, but it was like, you know, like, to be able to come to this moment where you actually think the impossible and practice the impossible, and this isn't one impossible situation. You need a little bit of pulling back, a step backward from your everyday routine, from something that you are doing, to be able to see actually what is it that you want to do as an artist. And for me, this now, you know, like, it's not only changing the medium, or you know, like, going to another medium and saying, okay, now we're going to switch to this screen work or something, but it's more like, what actually do we do, and for whom do we do? And about this impossibility and practicing the impossible, you know, like, living in today's world, we've all you know, like, it's become such a painful thing to think about the whole of the world under capitalism and how we live, and also like all of the utopias of the 20th century that were kind of strongly working still in the 20th century somehow fell, and people lost belief that they could imagine another type of utopia or some kind of, like another type of world or another world that we could actually live in. There is this cynicism, like it is either you accept this, and then, anyway, you have to accept it because there's no place outside capitalism anyway. So, but thinking about the impossible practices and practicing the impossible kind of brings this question as, any utopia anyway is always comes from a kind of construction from the already known construction of reality, and this construction of reality, the world that we believe that is the truth of, that this is the only way that we can live. So it produces certain possibilities, but also certain impossibilities. So utopias are never pure fictions. They are always somehow an opening from a specific point of view of seeing the world. So I don't know, maybe just this to say that I've already come, as many artists, I suppose, yourselves as well, to this position to start thinking, okay, and what do we do with our art? For whom we are doing it, and who actually needs it? Should I be doing this? Should I be doing something else much better? Should I use my time here on while I live much better to help alleviate people's misery, or should I do art, and can I do it with the art? So I don't know. That's something that's a question that I don't suppose that I will be having an answer to. But this crisis and the earthquake definitely put me now in a situation that I need to think about it much, and then I have the time to think about it.
Thank you, Nikolina. Yeah, we were talking shortly yesterday with Ella, Anika, Margareta, and Linda about how they're continuing their studies and how they deal with that. And we came to this realization how specific their knowledge of their bodies and dancing will be, and what kind of responsibility now you have for yourselves and for actually inventing this new understanding of dancing because you have to. So yeah, maybe you can tell us where are you now and how do you relate, because one of the reasons what we invited students is that it's a very different position for being a mid-career artist or having experience behind you, or being in second year of your studies and now being put in this position. So yes, can you, one of you, I'm not going to unmute and share. Margareta, for the first time.
Well, I have to admit that I'm a little bit nervous after all this. It's really hard for me somehow to put into words everything that I feel right now. But yeah, since I invest a lot of time in my education, I got really confused when everything when everything stopped in the middle of my learning. And I feel a little bit lost and confused and sometimes angry, but I understand that this is only temporary, and I think that maybe those feelings also can be strength. In a way, they mean that we care and then that we want to like to continue working on ourselves, and that we somehow believe that we can manage to deal with this situation, and that we believe in our education even so. And yeah, I'm trying to find a way how to work with my body in my room, in my house. But I don't think, I think that we cannot substitute work in the studio with other people, because, for example, I have a lot of motivation and energy when I'm with other people. But I don't think that that this should be some kind of a gap. Maybe it's also a way to find new ways of learning, to find a way how to communicate with ourselves also, and maybe to take advantage of technology in a way. Maybe this is also okay because we can think how we can use this technology in other ways when all of this finish. I don't know. Yeah. Not sure what to add.
For me, Ella, sorry, would you like to
go?
Thank you. Hi everybody. So maybe to link on Margareta and Nikolina, after this earthquake, although I wasn't hit by it because I was in Rijeka, but all of my friends were in Zagreb, and seeing their messages and being with them over phones, and feeling them in such a vulnerable state where their lives were endangered, I felt horrible, of course, as I guess you all experienced. But I think that after that, I started thinking about, as some of you mentioned already, about other people, about people who do not have home, about people who have home, but their homes do not feel as homes, and other possible situations that I cannot even maybe imagine, because I'm actually living a perfect conditions. I mean, a perfect life. And I realized that I'm not important at all. And like me, what my problems are, that I will lose my muscle endurance, that I will lose this and that's not important for me now. What I thought it is important in the first week of staying home. And on the trace what Nikolina said, I also started questioning, like, what am I doing with my life? What is the point of everything? Why am I dancing? Like, why am I doing this? And I realized maybe one of the possible answers for me, which I don't take as a only truth, is I'm doing it for the others. I'm doing it for the world. I'm doing it to share, and I'm leaving it in the heritage of the world. And that's also why I realized that maybe I shouldn't focus on everything that I will lose and then everything that I'm losing, but maybe to focus on like, if I'm in a certain inability, if I'm in this immobilized state, maybe I should focus on what is then left for me that is not under this restriction. What are the places through which I can work through? What are the places where I can still keep my head above the water and continue moving, continue living? Yes, like if I cannot do this, what can I then do? like creating spaces for myself and for others to continue life. And it's not something that that is completely embodied in me. It's something that I have to remind myself every day too. But yes, I feel like for sure that if the world around us is changing, that it seems reasonable to me that we are also supposed to change in a way. And I think that this responsibility is on each one of us. And that's my experience so far.
What I wanted to say was that it's similar to what Anika was saying now, that now we have like, not an opportunity, but rather we are pushed into it, into doing things that we otherwise maybe wouldn't. So for instance, like, I don't know, for choreography, we are also working with Zoom and performance on Zoom and choreography on Zoom and the improvisation and everything. And what I also talked about yesterday, we have, when we have classes, we have these big studios. And now we are in these private and smaller spaces. So I think for me, that is like challenging. You know, we worked last semester with our professor Irma in Museum of Broken Relationships. That is like a very small space. And already then I was like, it was hard for me because I'm not used to working in such small spaces. And I was thinking about how I should start practicing that too. So now I'm kind of forced into it. And also like having to motivate yourself and rely on yourself every day to put in work, which I think it will be useful when we finish the academy, because now it's just, you go there every day and then you have like a schedule and you just do it. You don't have to, you do have to be motivated and everything, but the responsibility is not only on you. It's kind of more shared. And now it's just not entirely me, but yeah.
Yeah. Linda, do you want to add something on?
I mean, I agree absolutely with everything that the girls said. And it's kind of, it just came up to my mind. It's now kind of an inside joke, but on our technique classes, we worked with this saying, charging to go. And now this time is really like made for that. Just charge yourself and then we can go later. So that's kind of an inside joke that came to my mind right now. But basically the primary feeling that I got after the self-isolation happened was like that urgency to respond, what Siegmar said, I think. Like urgency to do something and quickly, I don't know, I felt really threatened by that time that stopped suddenly, and I felt that I have responsibility to do something with my body or do something creatively. But like from time to time now I realize it's okay to stop for a moment. Like finally we can stop for a moment and realize where our bodies are right now. And yeah, to go more introspectively and to appreciate the nothingness that is happening right now in our lives. So that's something that came up to my mind, and which with what I'm really struggling. Like, do I have to be productive in order to be like a good student, a good dancer, a good whatever? Or am I just like, how do I work with myself and with my body? That's kind of the questions that I'm thinking about. But as it goes for the school, I mean, whatever happened, I mean, I can only imagine how hard it is for the teachers, and they're amazing. I just have to say how they organize, how they are capable in all the situations and with their personal things and with the earthquake and being apart from family members that they just want to be with or whatever. And with all these situations, they have to work and organize all of this and continue studies for us students, and we are just waiting for them to, like, I don't know, upload something. And it's kind of a shame that we're in that situation and just like waiting for plates to be served for us. But whatever they came up with, it's so precious to me. It doesn't even matter what it is, and is it a valid substitute to our studies that we did before. But it's so, I don't know, just to have this kind of continuity, to think about art, to think about dance, to live it through this situation. I don't know, it's very like fragile to me, and very, I appreciate it very much in whatever form it comes.
Thank you. Yeah, there is a lot of these questions and thoughts and discussions about productivity and unproductivity and how to balance that. But, now we've been talking an hour and a half already. We started at 7, and I feel so many things has been open here, really personal and strong and universal. Very intense. But yeah, maybe now is the time if anybody wants to comment or join or share, continue some thoughts about what has been said, or
I just like to a little bit say something that it's going through my mind and what I'm reading about. It's lots of post-AIDS arts, right? Because we can also compare this situation with the virus, with the HIV virus, right? And I'm wondering how we survived that, and what was the art after the AIDS period. Some of this generation, they wasn't born even when the AIDS appears. So, and I'm reading a lot about how we got over this also situation. What the Siegmar was a dead or alive situation, right? It was, and also for me it's interesting how the human is behaving. This is more complex situation than AIDS was at the time, because it was concerning only mostly gay people, right? And as a single gay guy that I'm now, living by myself, no family, no pets, nobody, I'm wondering, you know, like what is this situation? Can I compare this situation with the fear that at the time I had from AIDS virus, right? From HIV virus, when I was also a bit studying in the London at that time, and I was afraid to approach to another person, you know, to touch another person. So I'm just putting this to the table as well. Yeah, okay.
There's one thing that I'd like to answer directly to that, because it's so, or to continue thinking with that, let's say, because I think so for example, just to stick, because I'm here now as somebody's telling stories about New Orleans. So just to stick with that, like one of the rituals, for example, that happens at the end of Mardi Gras, actually in the beginning of the day of Mardi Gras on Tuesday at 5 in the morning, is the procession of St. Anne's, which is basically a procession that starts at a church and continues and finishes up at the Mississippi. And it's an invitation for people to pour the ashes of their loved ones into the river. And there's people, and again, it's like an incredibly exuberant costumation going on, and it's always exuberant and decay at the same time. And it comes from funeral practices around the AIDS crisis, because gays were not allowed to be buried. Especially then, people who died of AIDS were not allowed to be buried. And so the queer community started a collective funeral practice, and there's plenty of those. And I mean, this is the New Orleans kind of manifestation of it, but there are plenty other people and other funeral practices, live funeral practices, how to practice your funeral alive in your community as long as you're still alive, that were partially, like some of them come or have been re-practiced in the face of the AIDS crisis. A lot of them also come from completely different cultures where death is not completely shoved into the closet, but is part of life and being alive. And I think the big difference is that they are collective practices. They are collective public practices, and this is the big problem. Why I'm like objecting this rhetoric of keeping safe at home a lot. We can take care by isolating ourselves, but our sense of safety depends on completely different things. Like coming from trauma theory or setting down the patterns of fright, flight, and freeze symptoms in the nervous system, the sense of safety is produced by the human touch, the voice, the rhythm of voices, and rhythm of voices that are not hectic, that are not urgent, that are, so I'm interested in like what is the, I think there are huge differences with the AIDS crisis, not just in how the politics around it is manifested, but also of what the AIDS crisis produced as collective political and cultural practices that were physical, collective. And so the question is, how can we keep practicing collective practices? For me, that's just to continue on your question, Zach.
Thank you. As a host, I'm seeing who is raising hands. I don't know if other people are seeing that. So Marco was raising hand. Marco, please unmute yourself.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thank you for saying everything that has been said in the past hour and a half. I just wanted to bridge something Nikolina said with back to our performance that we did the past week. When we were doing the performance a year and a half ago, or a year or whatever time ago, I was busy with reading this queer studies book by Jose Esteban Munoz about utopia, in which he argues that utopia or queerness as a utopic idea is not yet here, and it's always coming from the future, in which we can say that we are we, and we are not we right now, and that's why the present moment is despicable and unbearable and so on. When I was reading it, I found it quite paradoxical then, because in performing, there is always this idea of being here and now and being present, and that the present moment is your main focus. And I didn't really understand this so much, like this idea of like present being so horrible and awful, which is of course coming from a very privileged position, which is also like limitedly privileged. And now I totally like feel this idea embodied, and I'm trying more and more, I guess, every day to rethink this, think back to this this thought of the utopia being set in the future and being something with towards which we can go, because the present moment is awful and unbearable. Actually, that was it. I didn't want to say anything more.
I have an urge to invite Sonia to say something because we didn't hear her from the beginning. Sonia, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I was just going to unmute my microphone. And that's called it's maybe like part of the embodied empathy. It's like something that works beyond screen and seeing the screen. Like I feel overwhelmed and I feel grateful at the same time, in some way paradoxically. And I'm saying this about the Zoom, but as I'm saying it, I'm also realizing that that's how I feel about the whole situation. I had a physical response to what Linda was speaking about like wondering if it's okay to halt and to stop and to question being a student, a dancer, an artist, and Nikolina has brought it as well. I had a very strong sensation over the last week, like over the first 2 weeks of the self-isolation, I had a lot the urge to do. And it was in a way also very clear for myself that like what I'm doing, I'm being a dance artist, and that's what I'm being in this world. And that's my like vehicle of contribution. And because of, and so through that, like I try to set forth things that like are my agencies to offer, or like to do stuff for myself and then for the others. And that's from where like the ANTISEZONA came. And I have, and in one hand I'm very like happy and grateful that it's there. Over the last week I have ongoingly felt more and more overwhelmed by the amount of everything, but also like a lot of work, a lot of extra work that that is in everything, that is in every stitch, And I think yesterday Nerina was speaking about like how the transitory spaces are not there because we do everything at home. So you do one thing and then you do another thing, and like, where's the break? And like these transitory actions, like how long it takes to set a Zoom, or how long it takes to calm down from being 2 hours online with all of you, and how like, so I've started feeling more and more desperate and more in need of break. And one of my secret desires is to like take off for the next 2 weeks. But at the same time, we have set now this format of meeting once a week. And all the while I'm teaching at the Visual Arts Academy and being aware of the privilege and the responsibility that is to be paid to teach some people, some 8 people in the state, how to become an artist next year. And then like struggling with the like showing up for them because I'm tired, and not just because I'm tired, but because I'm wondering about the sense of it, and I also feel like my body and I need a halt to be in a halt, and then to like receive information of where my breath is and what the world around is. And my question was, how do I teach that? Which is the question that Linda has from the side of a student. I don't, like, how do I teach that? And then if I expand it to like being a cultural producer here, like a self-invited cultural producer who wanted to be a dancer, but then had to become a choreographer, but then had to become a producer, but then had to become a self-curator, but then had to become a talk moderator. Yeah, like that links also to what Siegmar was talking about, staying, like why she didn't come back, staying in social situation and acknowledging process of grief collectively. And I'm actually like wondering or fantasizing of like what, like how do we do that? Like how do we do that in this talk? So how do I give up and not give up? Or how are we partially present to each other and partially not, because we cannot be? How do we keep on thinking this platform? How do I include all the people who are now in these frames? And like, I cannot, like the scope of my attention is not such, and like not everybody will get the space to speak. And yet these individual experiences, the affects we produce, are what I guess I'm always interested in when I do things, which I think is because I come from a background of performance artists. So I never think that things are in themselves finished and finite ideas, but always have to happen with someone and towards someone. And I don't have I'm performing as I'm speaking. I'm opening my mouth. I'm like refraining to my performing skills. I'm trying to feel how my body feels like. I'm trying to speak about it. I am staying in the space of struggle, of confronting the unknown, of hanging in the void. I'm being embarrassed by it. Yeah, and I guess that's what I might offer as being a dance artist to this conversation and to this question.
Yeah, I mean, I raised my hand, but maybe I can also just unmute myself, and just wanted to say to what Sonia said, that I mean, I really, this meeting was like super soothing, and you know, kind of just wanted to say that I think this meeting really performed everything that you now articulated, you know, and hope that it would, because also kind of speaking from this position where, you know, when Sonia and Irina and Sylvia invited me, you know, I was like resistant of doing this, because I already felt overwhelmed by all this sort of, just as you said, Sonia, you know, this like, also I really feel like I didn't have a moment to really stop, you know. I've been sort of, the whole time it's been like overproduction and sort of like expending my resources, you know, further and further. And I'm super glad that this discussion really was more even of like a support group and people sharing, you know, their experiences, rather than, you know, sort of continuing to perform, right? Because I had, like, right before you invited me, I really had this experience of, as I was, you know, teaching, and then I wanted to have a guest lecture. And then they suggested that the guest lecture be open to the public, right? And I had some resistance toward that. Like, we're pretending that everything is the same, you know, right? Just, you know, continue organizing these public events, you know, promote the university programming and whatever. And but I said yes, because I felt like, okay, you know, we need to sort of also continue in some way and give the students this sense that of some kind of normality, right? And then, you know, this crazy thing that I already told you about happened during this public meeting, where we were like you know, the guest speaker, Jelena Vesic, who I invited, she was talking, and then after 15 minutes we had this like Zoom bombing happening, which I just read about that day in The Guardian, but I never experienced it, didn't know much about. So, you know, like, I don't know, like 5 people just intercepting the conversation and drawing swastikas and yelling, you know, the N-word, and, you know, telling Jelena like super sexist things, right? And just, we didn't know what to do, but Jelena just continued, you know, talking, and the host managed to expel, you know, all the intruders, right? And then, but the students were, I mean, most of them were gone. And then the next day I talked, and now also this goes to what Siegmar was saying about safety, right? I mean, like I mean, they were telling me how absolutely terrified most of them were, like, with this event, and they just also couldn't believe that, you know, we were all just continuing, you know, as if everything was the same. And of course, the self-isolation made the event even worse, because, you know, the Zoom, and, you know, this is also kind of, to me, it was a continuation of thinking about the performance, right? This kind of Zoom realism, because now this Zoom is the only thing that we have left in terms of, you know, caring for each other and communicating and trying to, you know, keep some kind of a semblance of social interaction. And then when this platform becomes you know, precisely this feeling of like hyper unsafety, you know, when you really experience like this act of aggression. This is also when I, you know, when you invited me, my first reaction was like, you know, no, I don't want to sort of participate in another event that is like kind of, you know, like continuing to produce like this discourse where we're all, you know, supposed to go on as if nothing has happened. But, you know, I just wanted to say that, because I was also kind of traumatized by this as it happened only 2 days ago. Just wanted to say that for me, at least, this conversation turned out to be something completely different and really therapeutical.
Thank you, Ivana, for these words. This is really nice to hear. I'm thinking about two things that I want to share, even though I did speak already, and I would like to hear people who didn't speak and give the opportunity, not to steal time. But just one of the things is there's this sentence, actually the title, this "staying with trouble," that is all the time in my mind, and staying with the trouble, and the trouble is. It's actually it's a complex trouble that we are living now. One of part of it is the virus, and I think even the worst part of it is this isolation and the lockdown and the deprivation of the social contact and of the contact of any kind that we are living through now. And I think ANTISEZONA, what we tried to do is to react out of the real situation that we are into and in real time also. So somehow not to project the hopes into the future of how it will going to be resolved. So to hibernate for the time being, and then to see how to proceed on, but to proceed on now, which of course brought us a lot of stress and a lot of work, as Sonia was mentioning, and also a lack of possibility of just, you know, to shut down for a few days and not to do anything. Of course, we are managing our times as well as we can, but this is the reality of it, as usual. And the second thing what I wanted to share is, I have the feeling that we are going through a trauma altogether, which makes us comrades going through a battle. So, and it's a global battle. So it's probably, now it sounds really romantic or idealistic, but I think I wonder how this will result then to come out from this battle collectively. Yeah. Like generationally, of course, we all hear from these spaces, from ex-Yugoslavia spaces, people born in 60s, 70s, we do share the trauma from the 90s and how we came out from that situation. So probably maybe there is a parallel. No. That's it.
Can I say something? Now that you've been talking, I remember the talk that I had with my friend this morning. We were speaking about, you know, like these bodily practices that people do, and something about Siegmar. You keep mentioning that these celebrations, that they are kind of collective practices in New Orleans, right? That a lot of people actually engage and understand the ritual as a text, or, you know, like what it means and why they engage. And I was thinking, you know, we have very few of these rituals, at least in our society. One of them are funerals, but they are they have been much depreciated and devalued, and which has to do a lot with you know, like the grieving practices have been depreciated because of the financialization of the church. The church becomes a businessman, and people do not trust the institution of the church anymore. And but it's something, you know, like, and then I remember something that I talked to Jonathan Burrows a year ago, you know, like he was speaking about the music world, that people in the music world have a kind of shared resource. They have a knowledge which all the musicians actually have, and then when they are together, they can come, and then this research can be mobilized in order for them to create a piece of music. And when I think about us here in Croatia, probably I want to judge it for other societies, but you know, like, we came from socialism. We do not have a culture of the body. We have a culture of the sports. We have a culture of the ballet, you know, like all these kind of folklore stuff, but we do not have the culture of the body in terms of that a culture of dance would somehow imply. And it's like, you know, when I think about now, I see my child, she's receiving all these kind of tutorials to exercise at home, to keep her healthy, or whatever you can kind of get. Everything is either Pilates based or kind of raz dva type of exercises that are kind of completely not actually bringing you to be connected with the body. And there is something about, you know, like contemporary dance and this knowledge that were kind of imported from these and through somatic work that do bring us much more closer to the materiality of our existence. And I was just wondering, you know, like, if first of all, you know, like that this idea, like, for example, the other day, last week, I was doing a Feldenkrais session online. And when I lay down on the floor, that I felt like I was, you know, 1 centimeter above the floor. That I was so much resisting the gravity, because I was so, with all the, you know, like trying to figure out how to, that the moment when I actually started to breathe and yield to the ground, that I felt, okay, you know, like now I'm coming a little bit close. I wasn't aware that I was so agitated before I actually connected with the ground. And this type of experience, you know, just being 1 hour with yourself through movement. So it's just like being through moving in such a way that is gentle, that is kind of, you know, like at the basis of idea of dancing that I would like to promote, is something that is not reachable to many people, because these ideas have not passed through their lives. It's far away. They're far away from all of this. So I was just wondering if it would be possible, like it would be a nice thing to think about. How could we mediate our experiences as being in dancer's body, or having the experience of being dancers, to people who are actually not? You know, what kind of language do you need to do that, which is not technical, which is not Feldenkrais, which is not, you know, like moving this or that direction, you know, like instructional, but somehow mobilizes imagination. Because, you know, like when the question came from the girls, okay, what do we, how do we embody? My question was, but what do we embody? You know, like, what actually do I want to embody through movement? That the idea that, like, what is the idea that, like, I like to pass through my mind and body, that it expresses itself through movement? So, I mean, this is a question for me, and I just wanted to share this.
Linda?
I wanted to link with a similar thought, like we're now here where we are, and I personally never felt more as a part of history as I am now. I never had like experience of the war or any huge crisis, so I really, like, this is the first time when I feel like I'm part of something big. And with this situation, also what is happening to art? Will art be not only like dance and like every category, but will art be redefined because of this whole situation, whole new age, whole new period I mean, I feel it like it is. And I was thinking like now, like specifically in Croatia, I always thought like with dance and our art also, but there's so, it's a small group of people. It's always the same people that share the same interests and appreciate it the same way. But I was thinking like, I always heard like izgovore, that it's not so approachable or like art to regular people, like it's not too approachable for them, or they don't have time for it. And I was thinking like, now they do, now it is more approachable than ever. And I just had a thought, like maybe a question for someone here, if someone has the answer or a thought, like what do you think will, like after this whole period, when it stops, will maybe art get its like worldly attention, like I don't know, be more appreciated? Maybe art in this like difficult situation will be used like to regenerate, to, like Nikolina said, how to we have this knowledge to work with our bodies, and which are very much connected with our mind also. And for me, like knowing dance has helped me with my life. Like it's never like, for me it was never divided, like dance, I'm dancing and then I'm living, like it's always connected and intertwined. And I was thinking like, we have this knowledge not about only dance, like art, but also about life. And maybe if we can like share it, and maybe people would use it, and then like consequently it would make people more, I don't know, conscious about what art can be and how great it is.
Will art be more appreciated at this utopian idea that is, I think, connected with so many things, starting from economy, but for sure it will, the practices will radicalize, already are radicalizing, because as Sonia was saying, and as everybody's feeling, nobody will engage in frivolity of art, because the experiences are so much more, are getting deeper and harder. Yeah, I don't know. It is, I think, that the need to respond to what's going on is essential for being an artist, and how you push through the reality and how you manifest, how you make visible what you are sensing is shifting, is changing, and the bigger the trauma is, you'll need to close, and now the distance between realization, creation, manifestation can be bigger distance somehow, but the urge is essential, something like that. I'm like really improvising, trying to speak for different experiences that I had, including different ways of isolations and embodiment. Yeah, I don't know. So now, are we getting slowly to the end of this meeting? Jacques, you wanna unmute?
Paradoxically, I had a project for this year, which is called Situation in the Body or No More Body. Anya knows it. She gave me a chance in introspection to try out some work in progress. And I'm wondering, what am I going to do, out of this present moment, I thought like I was very clever when I was doing work in progress and I had some strong ground to do it. And now I'm completely lost. I thought like, where is my body? What am I going? Am I going to perform something which is a kind of illustration of I'm not there? Or what is the tools? What tools I have? What kind of tools I'm going to develop? What is this with the Zoom when I'm now leaving you and I went now to toilet and I pee in the toilet and I came back to you here, What was happened? What was happened? I was in a completely different universe in my toilet. Can you imagine that? And I came back to you, and I was like totally in a social situation. It was for me. It was like, what the fuck am I gonna do with this project? Really. I mean, this is exactly what is going on through my mind right now. Like Sylvia said, we want to be, this meeting is about now, So this is what I'm thinking when I'm looking at you. I'm thinking like, what is it? Where is my body? Should I pretend there is no body on stage next? It's stupid. It's completely stupid. Yeah.
And that's something I wanted to, Nikolina putting a question up in the air about how to communicate the experience you have when you dance. I think for me, it has always been to play, because this is something we all know how to do. And this is how we come into being, to play. And the question is not to create a game for me, it's more like, can I find a game in what's going on? Game in sense of play, like English has a nice distinction between play and game. Yeah, and the other thought I had was also, not just now, since many years, is that I'm observing with me and others, is that how to learn through joy and not only through pain or misery or catastrophe, but how to learn through joy and celebration, like Siegmar was mentioning. This is my constant question in a way. So yeah, and the last thing, playing, for me in my exploration of it, it's connected to the sense of security, of course, when you feel safe. And it's very individual, and it's always connected to now. It's never generalized. Yeah, and this is my share here for now.
So 1.5 hours became 2.5 hours, of course, as expected. Yeah, I don't know if anybody wants to exit. Of course, it's not unpolite to exit after 2.5 hours staring at the screen. But if anybody wants to share something more, please do. And yes, we will. I just wanted to say, maybe in behalf of ANTISEZONA, we are really immensely grateful for all of you joining here and for this experience. And probably it's going to become a beautiful archive of COVID crisis. Great. And yes, and it will go on. So there will be other opportunities to join also and to share, and other artists and other people and other folks joining in. And yeah, but maybe I don't know how to end this. I really don't know. Maybe I'm also not the person who should end. So I invite somebody to end.
When I teach class for the kids, I at the end I ask them that they should clap all together, but without anybody it's saying now. But this is very difficult with Zoom, you know, because I'm teaching also kids with Zoom. It's a very difficult. You have to put the hands, and then we have to clap, but nobody has to say now. And I don't know if we will succeed it, but it's maybe we could try.
But maybe before we do this, I think it's great. But before we do that, maybe somebody wants to speak before that. I don't know. Anybody?
Sure.
Lana wanted to say something, please. Lana, you have to unmute yourself, Lana.
Okay, I did it. I just also want to share that I went to toilet too, but I turned off the camera and I took you with me, which is amazing that I can do it. And I really love this experience. And another thing that I just want to share is that so about all these questions that I also have it with the productivity and the sense and purpose, and I feel like I had the first wave of this while I was having personal crisis like some years ago. And now I was thinking like it will come again, the same intensity, but actually what happened now, that what is actually my biggest challenge as like performer or thinking about art, and this is going to be now, I'm even like, it's strange for me to say it, but so I moved 10 days ago. I came back to Zagreb and I moved in the house with my parents, which was, it's like, this is the situation now. And there were some questions to participate in some kind of performances or to do a performance. And I realized I would be doing performance in my room. And any given moment, my mother could come in and it would make me re-question everything that I do. And I realized, fuck, like, would I do everything that I do even if my mom is in? And I'm like, why? That's the crucial thing for me now. Never expected this question. Yeah. Thanks.
Great. Thank you for this. No, but maybe we should all unmute ourselves, like everybody.
My God, this is very difficult. Watching all the screens at the same time.
Somebody is freezing.
It's difficult, you see. It's not like in the studio.